January 8, 1945, 0820 hours, Versailles, France. The Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force occupies a palace that once held kings. Now it holds the weight of a war that refuses to end. The grand halls echo with the mechanical clatter of typewriters, the urgent footsteps of staff officers, the low murmur of men who haven't slept properly in weeks. Outside, a cold rain falls on the cobblestones, the kind of rain that soaks through wool and settles into bones. In a small office on the second floor, Dwight David Eisenhower sits alone. The ashtray on his desk overflows, 4 cigarettes, maybe 5, stubbed out in the last hour. The room smells of stale smoke and wet paper. A single desk lamp throws yellow light across a stack of intelligence reports, casualty figures supply manifests. The numbers blur together after a while. 76,000 American casualties, 100,000 German casualties. Entire divisions ground to nothing in the snow, but the reports are not what hold his attention now. On his desk, a telegram, 2 pages, the words typed in the stark, impersonal font of military communications. No pleasantries, no preamble, just facts delivered like a blow to the gut. From Bradley Omar N., Lieutenant General, 12th Army Group to Eisenhower. Dwight D. General, Supreme Commander, Classification, Eyes Only, Subject Command Crisis. The first paragraph is simple enough. Montgomery held a press conference yesterday. January 7th, a schoolhouse somewhere in Belgium, reporters gathered in the cold. The Field Marshal spoke for 30 minutes about the Battle of the Bulge, about German offensives and Allied responses, about the brilliant maneuvers that saved the situation. He spoke about himself. Eisenhower reads the second paragraph again. His hand doesn't shake. Not yet. But there's a tightness in his chest, a slow building pressure like the air before a thunderstorm. Montgomery described the American forces as disorganized, on the verge of collapse. He implied that only British intervention, only his own steady hand, prevented total catastrophe. He barely mentioned Patton's drive from the south. He didn't mention the 101st Airborne at Bastogne at all. 14 American journalists were present, 11 filed stories within 6 hours. The word they used most often was betrayal. The third paragraph is where everything breaks. Patton called at 0900 hours this morning. He was not calm. He did not use proper radio protocol. He screamed into the telephone that if Montgomery was not relieved of command, he would resign his commission immediately. Bradley told him to wait, to think clearly, to remember the larger war. Patton's response was unequivocal. Fire him or I resign. Those exact words, and then the final line, the one that makes Eisenhower's jaw tighten. Sir, if you do not remove Montgomery from command of American forces, I will submit my own resignation. I cannot serve under a man who claims credit for American blood. Bradley follows Patton, both of them. Gone. Eisenhower sets the telegram down slowly. He leans back in his chair. The leather creaks. Outside, the rain intensifies, drumming against the window like fingers, tapping out a message he can't quite decode. 24 hours ago, he thought the crisis was over. The German offensive, Hitler's desperate gamble in the Ardennes, was collapsing. The bulge in the Allied line was being compressed, squeezed from north and south like a vice, closing on steel. In 8 days, maybe less American forces would meet at a small Belgian town called Houffalize. The trap would snap shut. The German army would be cut in half, their last reserves destroyed. Victory was so close he could taste it. Now this. There's a second page attached to Bradley's telegram. Eisenhower almost missed it. A field report, dated January the 7th, location Malmedy Crossroads, subject discovery of executed American prisoners. During advance operations, elements of 291st Engineer Combat Battalion discovered bodies of 84 American soldiers in snow-covered field, approximately 1 kilometer south of Malmedy. Evidence suggests prisoners were disarmed, assembled in field, and executed by small arms fire. Bodies show signs of having been shot while hands were raised or while lying wounded. Wire marks on wrists indicate prisoners were bound before execution. Preliminary investigation identifies perpetrators as elements of 1st SS Panzer Division Kampfgruppe Piper. Eisenhower reads it twice. His hands don't shake. Not yet. But there's a coldness spreading through his chest that has nothing to do with the January weather. 84 men, disarmed, bound, executed. This changes things. Not strategically, not tactically, but it changes the nature of what they're fighting. This isn't just about territory or political objectives anymore. It's about men who murdered prisoners in cold blood, about an enemy that deserves no quarter. And if word of this spreads through the ranks, when word spreads, because these things always spread, American soldiers will remember. They'll remember when they encounter SS troops. They'll remember when Germans try to surrender. The rules of war, already frayed by 4 years of brutality, are about to disintegrate completely in the Ardennes forest. Eisenhower sets the report aside, adds it to the growing list of problems he can't solve. Malmedy is for the war crimes tribunals, for after the war. Right now, he has to deal with the war crimes being committed by his own command structure. The crime of pride, the crime of vanity, the crime of letting personal feuds override operational necessity, not capital crimes. But potentially just as deadly in their consequences. He reaches for another cigarette, lights it with a wooden match. The flame trembles slightly before he shakes it out. He inhales deeply, holds the smoke, exhales slowly toward the ceiling. The nicotine doesn't help. Nothing helps. The door opens without a knock. His chief of staff, Bedell Smith, enters, carrying another folder. Smith's face is drawn pale under the harsh lamplight. He's seen the telegram, of course he's seen it. "How bad?" Smith asks. Eisenhower doesn't answer immediately. He takes another drag, considers the question. How bad? As if bad can be quantified. As if there's a scale for this kind of disaster. "Patton is serious," Eisenhower finally says. His voice is flat, emotionless. "Bradley too, they'll do it." Smith nods. He's known Patton for years, knows the man doesn't bluff. When George Patton makes a threat, it's not theater. It's a promise. "And if they resign," Eisenhower stubs out the cigarette, immediately reaches for another. His hands move automatically now, ritual without thought. Light, inhale, exhale. Third Army loses its commander 8 days before the greatest encirclement of the war. 12th Army Group loses its commander. We lose the 2 best operational minds in the European theater. Morale collapses. The press eats us alive. Congress demands explanations, and Hitler gets 6 more months. The numbers are simple. Brutal. Final. Smith sets the folder on the desk, but doesn't open it. "And if you fire Montgomery..." Now Eisenhower laughs. It's a short, bitter sound, more exhalation than humor. "Churchill pulls British support. London removes me as Supreme Commander. The alliance fractures. The Germans get 6 months. Different math, same answer." They sit in silence. The rain continues its steady percussion. Somewhere in the building a telephone rings, footsteps in the hallway. The war doesn't stop for personal crises, it never does. Eisenhower opens the folder Smith brought. More reports. He scans the first page, then stops. His eyes narrow. A message from Washington, received at 0600 this morning. President Truman has heard about the press conference. He's heard the rumors. He wants an explanation, not a suggestion, not advice. An explanation. Within 24 hours, Eisenhower closes the folder. He thinks about how they got here. Sicily. Market Garden. A dozen smaller operations where Montgomery's caution clashed with Patton's aggression, each one adding another layer of resentment, each one making this moment more inevitable. The feud isn't new, it's been building for 18 months, and now it's about to explode. He stands abruptly, walks to the window. The rain has stopped, but the sky remains grey heavy with clouds that promise more precipitation. Below, staff officers cross the courtyard, shoulders hunched against the cold. They move with purpose. They have orders, clarity. They know what they're supposed to do. Eisenhower envies them. "Get me the operational summaries," he says without turning from the window. Everything from December 16th to now. Patton's movements, Montgomery's movements, hour by hour. "Sir, you've already reviewed..." "I want to review them again." Smith leaves without further argument. Eisenhower remains at the window. His reflection stares back at him from the glass. A tired man. 54 years old, but feeling 70. The uniform still fits, but hangs differently now. Weight lost through stress and irregular meals and too many cigarettes. He remembers the first meetings, Montgomery in North Africa, already a legend after El Alamein, speaking with absolute certainty about everything, military tactics, politics, the proper way to conduct operations. Insufferable but effective. Montgomery didn't lose battles. He might take twice as long. He might demand 3 times the resources. But when he committed, it succeeded. And Patton, Morocco, custom uniforms and ivory-handled revolvers, speaking in aphorisms and profanity, believing war was an art form, and he was its greatest practitioner, exhausting but brilliant, winning through audacity and speed and an almost supernatural understanding of momentum. 2 men, 2 philosophies, both necessary, both impossible to reconcile, and now Eisenhower has to choose between them. The door opens. Smith returns with 3 thick folders. He sets them on the desk, opens the first one. Maps spill out, movement charts, communications logs. December 26th, Smith begins. Patton initiates the relief of Bastogne. Third Army pivots 90 degrees north. Weather conditions blizzard. Temperature -15 Celsius. Visibility near zero. Eisenhower returns to his desk. Sits. Lights another cigarette. Smith continues. Patton commits 3 divisions initially. 4th Armored, 26th Infantry, 80th Infantry. No pause for resupply. No waiting for weather to clear. Just attack. Straight into the teeth of the German defenses where... The maps show it clearly. Red arrows indicating Patton's advance. Jagged, chaotic, multiple axes simultaneously. Find weak points. Exploit them. Don't stop. First contact at 0600. By 1400 hours, 4th Armored has penetrated 8 kilometers. By midnight, they're within 12 kilometers of Bastogne. Total advance in 16 hours, 24 kilometers through active enemy resistance in a blizzard. The casualty reports are staggering. That first day alone, 3rd Army lost nearly 2,000 men. Killed, wounded, captured. Tanks disabled by mechanical failure. Soldiers suffering frostbite and hypothermia. But they kept moving. December 27th. Patton commits 2 more divisions. Breakthrough achieved. German defensive line fragmenting. Elements of 4th Armored reach Bastogne perimeter at 16:30 hours. Link established. 101st Airborne relieved. Eisenhower studies the maps. Patton's operations look insane on paper. No proper preparation. Inadequate supply lines. Flanks exposed. Every military academy would fail a student who proposed these plans. But they worked. They always worked. Because Patton understood something the academies didn't teach. Speed is its own form of protection. Move fast enough and the enemy can't react. Strike before they're ready and their superior numbers don't matter. Smith moves to the next folder. Montgomery's operations, Northern Shoulder. January 3rd, Montgomery launches coordinated offensive from the north. Weather conditions improved. Temperature -5 Celsius. Visibility moderate. The contrast is immediate. Where Patton's arrows are jagged and opportunistic, Montgomery's are straight and methodical. Advance 3 kilometers. Consolidate. Bring up supplies. Advance 3 more kilometers. Everything by the book. January 3rd to January 8th. Total advance 48 kilometers. Casualties 9,000. Eisenhower does the math silently. Patton covered 133 kilometers in 11 days. 67,000 casualties. Montgomery covered 48 kilometers in 5 days. 9,000 casualties. Different approaches. Different philosophies. Different costs. Montgomery would argue his method was superior. Fewer casualties, controlled advance, victory achieved through preparation. Why sacrifice men unnecessarily? Patton would argue Montgomery's caution cost lives differently. Every day spent preparing was a day Americans died at Bastogne. Every hour of careful planning was an hour of German artillery falling on the 101st Airborne. Who was right, Eisenhower doesn't know, and that's the problem. The folder in front of Eisenhower contains a transcript, 8 pages, single-spaced. Every word Montgomery spoke at yesterday's press conference, transcribed by a stenographer and transmitted to Supreme Headquarters within 2 hours of the event concluding. Eisenhower has read it 3 times already. Each reading makes it worse. The press conference took place in a small schoolhouse in Zonhoven, Belgium. 14 journalists attended, 12 American, 2 British. Montgomery arrived precisely on time as he always did. He wore his trademark beret and a wool sweater under his uniform jacket. The room was cold. Someone had tried to heat it with a small coal stove that produced more smoke than warmth. Montgomery stood at the front of the room. No notes. He never used notes. He spoke for 31 minutes. The transcript begins simply enough. Pleasantries. Acknowledgement of the journalist's difficult working conditions. A brief overview of the strategic situation. The German offensive launched December 16th. The initial breakthrough. The crisis. The response. Then, page 3. The situation was, I must say, somewhat untidy when I arrived, Montgomery said. The American forces had been hit quite hard. Command and control was fragmentary. There was considerable confusion about objectives and coordination. Eisenhower's jaw tightens as he reads the words again. Untidy. As if the bloodiest battle in American history was merely a housekeeping problem. Montgomery continued. I immediately set about tidying things up. We established clear lines of communication, we reorganized the defensive positions, we brought order to what had been frankly rather chaotic. The journalists asked questions. Montgomery answered them with the absolute confidence of a man who believed every word he spoke. Question. Field Marshal. What was your assessment of American combat effectiveness during the crisis? Answer. The American soldier fights with tremendous courage, absolutely tremendous, but courage alone is not sufficient. Modern warfare requires coordination, planning, systematic application of force. These are areas where I must say there was room for improvement. Me? Question. Were American commanders adequately prepared for the German offensive? Answer: I don't think it's productive to assign blame. What matters is that when the situation required experienced leadership, when it required someone who understood how to manage large-scale defensive operations, I was able to provide that leadership. And the result speaks for itself. Page 5. This is where it becomes unforgivable. Question: Field Marshal, how would you characterize your working relationship with American commanders during this operation? Answer: General Hodges and his staff were cooperative once clear direction was established. As for other American commanders, well, I believe in letting results speak for themselves. The northern shoulder held. We've now transitioned to offensive operations. We're advancing steadily toward our objectives. This was achieved through proper military science, not through, shall we say, theatrical gestures. Theatrical gestures. Everyone in the room knew what that meant, who that meant. Patton wasn't mentioned by name. He didn't need to be. The implication was clear. Montgomery was the professional. Patton was the showman. Montgomery achieved results through planning. Patton achieved headlines through recklessness. The final question cut deepest. Question: Field Marshal, in your assessment, who deserves primary credit for preventing a German breakthrough to the Meuse River? Montgomery paused. According to the transcript, he paused for exactly 4 seconds, a calculated pause, long enough to suggest careful consideration, short enough to maintain confidence. Answer: I think any fair analysis of the situation would conclude that the steadiness of the British 21st Army Group and the rapid response we mounted to stabilize the northern sector was decisive in preventing catastrophe. The Americans fought bravely, but bravery without direction is simply casualties. What was needed was systematic defensive operations followed by carefully coordinated counterattacks. That is what I provided. That is what made the difference. Not a word about Bastogne. Not a word about the 101st Airborne holding against 5 German divisions for 7 days. Not a word about Patton's Third Army pivoting 90 degrees and driving north through a blizzard to break the siege. Just Montgomery, saving the Americans from themselves. Eisenhower closes the transcript, pushes it away, reaches for another cigarette, but the pack is empty. He crumples it, tosses it toward the wastebasket, misses. The door opens. Smith enters, carrying a fresh pack of cigarettes and a pot of coffee. He sets both on the desk without speaking. Smith has been with Eisenhower long enough to read the silences. This one says, "Leave the coffee and go." But Smith doesn't leave. "The American press reaction is worse than we thought," Smith says quietly. "Stars and Stripes is running an editorial tomorrow. The headline is, 'Who Saved Who?'" Eisenhower pours coffee. His hand is steady. His hand is, years of command have taught him to control the external, even when the internal is screaming. And the civilian papers, Chicago Tribune is calling it an insult to American sacrifice. New York Times is more measured but still critical. They're asking why an American Supreme Commander allowed a British Field Marshal to diminish American achievements. "Because I didn't allow anything," Eisenhower says. His voice is quiet, but there's steel underneath. "I didn't authorize that press conference. I didn't review his remarks. I found out about it the same time everyone else did. The press doesn't care about those distinctions." "I know." Smith hesitates, then carefully. "There's a secondary problem. Montgomery's headquarters is leaking. Someone on his staff is telling journalists that you specifically requested he take credit for stabilizing the situation, that you wanted British success emphasized to maintain alliance unity." Eisenhower's coffee cup stops halfway to his mouth. He sets it down slowly. "That's a lie." "Yes, sir, but it's a lie that's being repeated in London. Churchill's office has received inquiries. They want to know if it's true." The room suddenly feels smaller, the walls pressing in. Eisenhower stands, walks to the window again. It's become a habit, a way to move, to think, to avoid the faces of the men he has to disappoint. Outside, the sky is darkening, not sunset. Just clouds, thickening, threatening more rain. January in Northern Europe is a special kind of miserable. Cold without being clean, wet without being refreshing. Everything grey and brown and tired, like the war itself. "Montgomery believes what he said," Eisenhower says, still looking out the window. "That's the worst part. He's not lying. He genuinely thinks he saved the situation. He looks at the casualty figures and sees proof. 9,000 casualties on his front versus 67,000 on Patton's. Slow and steady saved lives. Speed killed Americans." And Patton looks at the same numbers and sees something different. Patton sees days. Every day Montgomery spent preparing was a day Americans died at Bastogne. Every hour of careful planning was an hour the 101st Airborne held alone. Montgomery saved lives in his sector by spending them in someone else's. Smith joins him at the window. They stand side by side, 2 men carrying weight they can't set down. They're both right, Smith says. I know. And both wrong. I know that too. The telephone rings. Smith answers it, listens, his expression darkening. He covers the mouthpiece. It's Bradley. He says it's urgent. Eisenhower takes the phone. Brad. Omar Bradley's voice comes through the line. Tight. Controlled. The voice of a man who's spent the last 12 hours forcing himself not to react. Ike, I'm calling as a courtesy before I put this in writing. I cannot continue to serve if Montgomery remains in command of American forces. This isn't about ego, it's about credibility. How can I ask my men to follow orders from a command structure that allows this kind of, I don't even have words for it? Bradley isn't a dramatic man, he doesn't shout, doesn't threaten, he's the steady one. The teacher from Missouri, who ended up commanding an army group because he was competent and calm and utterly reliable. Which makes this worse. When Bradley breaks, it means something fundamental has fractured. Brad, I need you to hold position for 72 hours. Give me 3 days.
3 days. For what? For Montgomery to hold another press conference, for him to tell the world how he single-handedly won the war while American boys died in the snow. Eisenhower has never heard Bradley this angry, not when his men were dying, not when supply lines collapsed, not even when the German offensive first broke through. Bradley stayed calm. That was his gift. Unshakable calm. Gone now. 3 days for me to fix this, Eisenhower says. I'm asking you to trust me.
Nye, silence on the line. Not empty silence, the silence of a man making a decision that will define careers and possibly alter the course of the war. 72 hours, Bradley finally says. After that, I'm submitting my resignation, and Ike Patton won't wait that long. You know he won't. The line goes dead. Eisenhower hands the phone back to Smith, sits down heavily. The chair creaks under his weight. Everything in this palace creaks. Centuries of history bearing down on furniture that was never meant to support it. How long do we have before Patton calls? Smith asks. Eisenhower checks his watch. 09:43. Patton is probably on the phone right now, screaming at his staff. Give him another hour to work himself into a proper rage, then he'll call. Before noon, Eisenhower says, he'll wait until noon because he knows that's when I review the morning intelligence reports. He'll want my full attention. And what will you tell him? I don't know. The honest answer, the only answer. Eisenhower doesn't know because there is no good answer. Every option leads to catastrophe. Different catastrophes, but catastrophes nonetheless. The morning intelligence report arrives. Smith brings it in, sets it on top of the growing pile of papers. Eisenhower opens it mechanically, reads without really processing. German forces continue withdrawal toward the German border. Rear guard actions, delaying Allied advance, but no major counterattacks expected. Weather forecast clearing over the next 48 hours. Air operations can resume, roads improving, mobility increasing. All good news, the kind of news that would normally lift his spirits. The war is being won, slowly, expensively, but won. Except the war isn't just against Germany, it's against chaos, against entropy, against the natural human tendency to fracture under pressure. And that war Eisenhower is losing. He turns to a map on the wall, a large-scale overview of the entire Western Front. Blue arrows indicate Allied forces, red arrows indicate German forces. The arrows are converging. Slowly but inevitably they're converging on Germany itself. The plan is clear. Squeeze from the west while the Soviets squeeze from the east. Destroy the Wehrmacht, occupy Germany, end the war. But the plan requires unity, American and British forces working together. Montgomery's 21st Army Group in the north, Bradley's 12th Army Group in the center. 3 hammers striking in coordination. Break one hammer and the whole structure weakens. Eisenhower's finger traces the line from Hofelize east toward the Rhine River. That's the next objective. Cross the Rhine, enter Germany proper. But to get there requires overwhelming force applied with precision. Requires air superiority and logistical miracles. And most of all, requires commanders who trust each other. Trust. That's the resource he's running out of. Not ammunition or fuel or replacement soldiers. Trust. The telephone rings again. Smith picks it up before Eisenhower can move. Listens. His expression doesn't change, but something in his posture tightens. It's Patton, Smith says, holding out the receiver. Eisenhower checks his watch. 11:17, 43 minutes early. Patton must be angrier than usual. He takes the phone. George? The voice that comes through the line is not shouting. That's the first surprise. Patton's voice is quiet, controlled. The tone of a man who has moved past anger into something colder. Ike, I'm going to say this once. Fire Montgomery or I resign. Today, not tomorrow, not next week. Today. George, I need time to eat. There is no time. Every hour Montgomery remains in command of American forces is an hour my men think their sacrifice doesn't matter. Do you understand what that does? Do you understand what it means when soldiers die and then some British field marshal tells the world their deaths were the result of poor American leadership? Eisenhower grips the phone tighter. Montgomery didn't say that exactly. He said it close enough. He said American commanders needed his guidance to avoid catastrophe. He said systematic British operations saved the situation. He didn't mention Bastogne, didn't mention the 101st holding for 7 days, didn't mention my Third Army driving north through conditions that would have made him postpone for a month. I know what he said. Then you know what you need to do. Eisenhower closes his eyes. Behind his eyelids, he sees the map. The converging arrows, the timetable. Huffelei's in 8 days, Rhine crossing in 6 weeks, Berlin by summer if everything goes perfectly. But perfection requires all the pieces working together. George, if I fire Montgomery, Churchill will remove me. You know that, and whoever replaces me might fire you anyway. You've burned too many bridges in London. Silence on the line, Patton breathing, thinking, the gears turning in that brilliant, erratic mind. Then we both go down together, Patton finally says. Better that than serving under a man who steals credit from American dead.
Oh, it's not that simple. It is exactly that simple. This is about honor, Ike, something Montgomery wouldn't recognize if it bit him on his British ass. And there it is, the core of it. Not strategy or tactics or operational effectiveness. Honor. The concept that makes men charge machine gun nests and refuse to retreat and die for pieces of frozen ground that have no strategic value. Honor matters. Eisenhower knows it matters. An army without honor is just an armed mob.
Discipline comes from believing your cause is just and your leaders respect your sacrifice. But honor is also what makes wars last longer than necessary. It's what makes men refuse surrender when surrender would save lives. It's what makes possible this exact conversation. Give me 72 hours, Eisenhower says. 3 days, I'll fix this. How? I don't know yet, but I will. Another silence. Longer this time. 60 hours, Patton says. That puts us at midnight, January 10th. 1 minute past midnight, my resignation is on your desk, and Bradley's will be right next to it. The line goes dead. Eisenhower sets the phone down. His hand is shaking now, just slightly, a tremor he can't quite control. 60 hours, Smith says, not a question. He heard the whole conversation. 60 hours to save the alliance, or watch it collapse. Eisenhower stands, walks to the window one more time. The rain has started again. Steady, cold, the kind that gets into everything and never quite dries. Somewhere in the building a clock chimes noon. 60 hours. 59 now. 58. The countdown has begun. January 9th, 1945. 0600 hours. Eisenhower hasn't slept. The walk through the palace grounds lasted 2 hours, then back to his office, reading reports, smoking cigarettes, waiting for an idea that refuses to come. 46 hours remaining. Smith enters carrying breakfast on a tray, toast, coffee, eggs that look like they've been sitting too long. Eisenhower waves it away. You need to eat, Smith says. I need to think. Smith sets the tray down anyway. Then think while eating. You're no good to anyone if you collapse. Eisenhower picks up the coffee, black, strong enough to dissolve the spoon. He drinks it in 3 long swallows, feeling the caffeine hit his system like an electric shock. Any word from Montgomery? He asks. Nothing. His headquarters issued a statement overnight saying the field marshal stands by his assessment and has nothing to add. Of course, Montgomery has decided silence is strength. Let the Americans squirm. Let them realize they need him more than he needs them. The calculation isn't wrong. 21st Army Group is critical to the final push into Germany. Montgomery commands the best approaches to the Ruhr Germany's industrial heartland. Without British cooperation, the entire northern strategy collapses. But Montgomery's calculation misses one crucial element. Politics. Wars are won on battlefields, but they're sustained by political will. And right now, American political will is fracturing under the weight of Montgomery's arrogance. Get me General Marshall, Eisenhower says. Scrambled line. Smith's eyebrows rise. Marshall is the Army Chief of Staff, Eisenhower's direct superior. Calling Marshall means escalating this beyond theater command, means admitting he can't solve it alone. "You're sure?" Smith asks. "No, but do it anyway." The call takes 20 minutes to connect. Scrambled communications from France to Washington require multiple relay stations, authentication protocols, encryption sequences. Eisenhower uses the time to rehearse what he'll say, how to explain that the alliance is disintegrating over a press conference, how to request guidance without appearing weak. The line clicks, pops, then Marshall's voice clear despite the distance. "Eisenhower, this better be important. It's midnight here." "Sir, we have a command crisis." Eisenhower lays it out. Montgomery's press conference, Patton's ultimatum, Bradley's threat to follow, the political pressure from Truman, the impossible choice. Marshall listens without interrupting. When Eisenhower finishes, there's a long silence. Not the silence of a man thinking, the silence of a man already knowing the answer and deciding how to deliver it. "What do you need from me?" Marshall finally asks. "Guidance, sir. If I fire Montgomery, Churchill will likely request my relief. If I keep Montgomery, I lose Patton and Bradley. Either way, the command structure is compromised." "What does your gut tell you?" Eisenhower almost laughs. His gut is screaming that there are no good options, that every choice leads to disaster. "My gut says both men are necessary. Montgomery for the systematic reduction of German defenses, Patton for the exploitation when those defenses break. I need them both, but I can't have them both. Not after this." Marshall's voice comes back firm, decisive. "Then you need to create a third option." "Sir." "Eisenhower, you're thinking like a staff officer. Binary choices, option A or option B. But you're not a staff officer anymore. You're supreme commander. That means you make the reality. You don't choose between existing options. You create new ones." The words hang in the air. Create new ones. "What if Montgomery won't cooperate?" Eisenhower asks. "Then you don't need his cooperation. You need Churchill's. Go over Montgomery's head, not to demand he be fired, to propose a solution that gives everyone what they need." "Which is?" "That's for you to figure out. You have the authority, use it." "But Eisenhower, whatever you decide, decide fast. Uncertainty kills morale faster than bad decisions. Soldiers can handle being told no. They can't handle not knowing." The line goes dead. Eisenhower sits back, stares at the phone. Create a third option. Go to Churchill. The idea is dangerous. If Churchill interprets it as an American demand to discipline Montgomery, it could backfire spectacularly. But if framed correctly as a request for Churchill's wisdom in preserving alliance unity, maybe. Smith. Eisenhower calls. "Get me a secure line to London. Prime Minister's office." Smith appears in the doorway. "Churchill directly." "Churchill directly, but that's going to create waves." "Good. I need waves. I need something to break this logjam before Patton's deadline." The call to London takes even longer to arrange. Churchill doesn't maintain the same round-the-clock communications protocol as military headquarters. His staff has to be roused. Security verified. By the time the line connects, it's 0800 in Versailles. 9 o'clock in London. Churchill's voice booms through the static, unmistakable, even through the encryption warble. "General Eisenhower, to what do I owe the pleasure of a direct call at this ungodly hour?" "Prime Minister, I apologize for the intrusion, but we have a situation that requires your immediate attention." Eisenhower explains. Carefully, diplomatically, he emphasizes alliance unity. Frames Montgomery's press conference not as misconduct, but as a misunderstanding that's being exploited by those who want to divide American and British forces. Churchill listens. Eisenhower can hear him breathing heavily, can almost picture the Prime Minister in his study, cigar in hand, brandy nearby despite the morning hour. "I see," Churchill says when Eisenhower finishes, "and I presume General Patton is being his usual dramatic self about this." "Sir, with respect, this goes beyond General Patton's personality. The American press is questioning whether American forces are properly valued within the alliance. Congressional leaders are asking the President why British commanders claim credit for American sacrifices. I have a telegram from President Truman on my desk demanding explanations." "Ah." The single syllable carries enormous weight. Churchill understands immediately. This isn't about hurt feelings, it's about political survival. Truman can't afford to look weak, can't afford to let British generals overshadow American achievements. "What would you have me do, General?" "Here, this is the moment." Eisenhower takes a breath. "I'm not asking you to discipline Field Marshal Montgomery, sir. I'm asking you to help me find a path that preserves both his dignity and American morale. Something that acknowledges the full scope of Allied cooperation without diminishing anyone's contribution. You want me to contradict my Field Marshal publicly? I want you to provide context that he understandably focused on his own sector may have inadvertently omitted. Clever. Frame it as Churchill adding information, not correcting Montgomery. Give Churchill the role of statesman rather than disciplinarian. Churchill chuckles. It's a dark sound. You're learning, Eisenhower. Very well. I have a speech scheduled in the House of Commons in a few days. I'll see what can be done. But understand this, I won't throw Montgomery to the wolves to appease American sensibilities. He's a difficult man, yes. Arrogant, certainly. But he's also one of the finest commanders Britain has ever produced. I'm not asking you to throw him to anyone, sir. I'm asking you to remind the world that this war is being won by Allied cooperation, American and British together, not one or the other. And what will you do about Patton, his ultimatum, as you call it? I'll deal with Patton, but I need you to give me something to show him, some indication that the narrative is being corrected. Otherwise you lose your best field commander 48 hours before a critical operation. Churchill pauses. Very well. I'll address this in my speech, but Eisenhower, you owe me one, and I collect my debts. Thank you, Prime Minister. Don't thank me yet. I haven't decided what I'm going to say. I'll consider what serves the alliance best, which may not be what you want to hear. The line goes dead. Eisenhower sets down the phone. Smith is watching from the doorway. Well, Smith asks. He'll do something, maybe, in a few days, on his own terms. That's not good enough for Patton's deadline. I know, which means I need to go see Patton myself face to face. Smith's eyes widen. Sir, that's a 6-hour drive through territory that was a combat zone 2 weeks ago. Roads are barely cleared, and you'd be leaving headquarters at the most critical moment. Which is exactly why I need to go. Patton needs to see that I take this seriously enough to leave headquarters, that I'm willing to meet him on his ground, not demand he come to mine. And if Montgomery finds out you drove 6 hours to mollify Patton but wouldn't meet with him, then Montgomery can be offended. I'm done managing his feelings. This is about preventing Third Army from losing its commander. Smith nods slowly. I'll arrange the car. When do you want to leave? Now, before I change my mind. The staff car is a simple Dodge Command car, olive drab, mud splattered from winter roads. The driver is a young corporal, barely 20, who looks terrified when he realizes he'll be driving the Supreme Commander. At ease, Corporal, Eisenhower says, climbing into the passenger seat. We're going to Third Army headquarters, fastest route that's been cleared. Yes, sir. Through Rheims, then southeast. About 6 hours if the roads are good. Then let's hope the roads are good. They drive in silence through the morning. The countryside shows signs of war everywhere. Burned out tanks in fields, farmhouses with walls blown away, refugee columns moving slowly along the roadsides, everything they own piled on carts and wagons. This is what they're fighting for. Not strategic objectives or political alliances, these people. These shattered lives that need rebuilding. The car passes through a village, or what used to be a village. Now it's just rubble and broken stone. A church steeple stands alone, everything around it destroyed. An old woman sits on the steps staring at nothing. Eisenhower thinks about the numbers. 76,000 American casualties, 100,000 German casualties. But what about the Belgian civilians, the French farmers, the Dutch families? How many of them died because Montgomery and Patton couldn't set aside their pride long enough to coordinate properly? How many will die in the next 6 months if this alliance fractures? They pass through Rheims at midday. The cathedral still stands miraculous considering the fighting that swirled around it. Eisenhower thinks about the symbolism. Ancient stones surviving modern war. Endurance despite chaos. Maybe there's a lesson there. Third Army headquarters occupies a former German command post outside Nancy. The Americans took it in November, cleared out the Wehrmacht maps, and equipment hung American flags. But you can still see the German efficiency in how it's organized. Everything neat, systematic, very un-Patton. The staff officers snap to attention when Eisenhower walks in. He returns, the salutes, asks for Patton. The general is in his office, sir. I'll announce you. No announcement. I'll find him myself. Eisenhower walks through the building, passes briefing rooms where officers pore over maps, communications centers where radios crackle with traffic from forward units, the machinery of war grinding forward. Patton's office is at the end of a long hallway. The door is open. Through it, Eisenhower can see Patton standing at a window, hands clasped behind his back, staring out at the headquarters compound. Eisenhower knocks on the doorframe. Patton turns. His face registers surprise, then suspicion, then something harder to read. Ike, didn't expect you to drive all this way. I needed to see you in person. Patton gestures to a chair. Eisenhower sits. Patton remains standing, a power move, making Eisenhower look up at him. I'm not withdrawing my ultimatum, Patton says immediately. If that's why you came. I came because we need to talk, really talk, not through telephones or telegrams, face to face. Patton finally sits behind his desk, creating distance even while in the same room. Then talk, Eisenhower takes a breath. George, I understand why you're angry. Montgomery's press conference was inappropriate. It failed to acknowledge American sacrifices. And yes, it made you and your men look inadequate, despite your extraordinary achievements. Damn right it did. But I need you to understand the bigger picture. If you resign, Third Army loses its best commander at the worst possible time. If Bradley follows you, 12th Army Group is paralyzed, the entire command structure fractures, and Hitler gets exactly what he wants: Americans and British fighting each other instead of him. Patton's jaw tightens. So I'm supposed to swallow my pride? Let Montgomery steal credit, let my men think their sacrifices don't matter. I'm asking you to trust me to fix it. I called Churchill this morning, directly. He's agreed to address this in a speech to Parliament. Patton's expression shifts. Churchill? You went over Montgomery's head to Churchill. I went to the one person who can provide context without making this a direct confrontation between you and Montgomery. Churchill understands politics. He knows Truman is under pressure. He knows the alliance depends on American public support. Patton stands, paces to the window, stares out. What did Churchill promise? Nothing specific, but he'll speak. And when Churchill speaks, people listen. That's not good enough. It's what we have, George. Patton turns back. You know what really burns me? It's not that Montgomery is arrogant. Hell, I'm arrogant. It's that he doesn't understand what his caution costs. He walks to a filing cabinet, pulls out a folder, slaps it on the desk. Casualty reports from Bastogne, the 101st Airborne, 7 days under siege. Do you know what they went through? No ammunition, no medical supplies, wounded men dying because we couldn't evacuate them. And every single day I was driving north, Montgomery was consolidating his position, bringing up supplies, making sure everything was perfect. Before he moved, Patton's voice rises, anger breaking through. Every day he delayed was a day those men suffered. Every hour he spent planning was an hour they bled. And now he has the gall to say he saved the situation. He didn't save anything. He showed up after the worst was over and claimed credit. Eisenhower lets him vent. Sometimes commanders don't need solutions. They need to be heard. When Patton finishes breathing hard, Eisenhower speaks quietly. You're right. Patton blinks. What? You're right. Montgomery's methods cost lives in ways he doesn't acknowledge. His caution in his sector meant more pressure on yours, more casualties for Third Army. I see that. I understand that. Then why are you protecting him? Because I'm not protecting him, George. I'm protecting the alliance. There's a difference. Eisenhower stands, meets Patton's eyes directly. If I fire Montgomery, the British pull support. Maybe not immediately, maybe not officially, but Churchill will be forced to demonstrate that Britain won't be pushed around by American demands. He'll slow walk cooperation, delay approvals, make everything harder, and the soldiers on the front line pay that price. Patton is silent, thinking. So what's your solution? He finally asks. Give me until your deadline. If I haven't fixed it by then, I'll accept your resignation and Bradley's, and I'll face whatever consequences come from that. But I'm asking you as a personal favor to give me every possible hour to find another way. Patton walks back to the window, stares out at his army, his Third Army, the men who followed him from Normandy to here, who trust him, who believe in him. The silence stretches. Eisenhower doesn't fill it. This is Patton's decision. Finally, without turning around, Patton speaks. 42 hours, that's what you have left. Not a minute more. 42 hours, Eisenhower agrees. He leaves without another word. Walks back through the headquarters, past the saluting officers, out to the waiting staff car. The drive back to Versailles feels longer. The winter sun is already setting, casting long shadows across the frozen fields. The corporal drives, carefully avoiding the worst potholes. Eisenhower closes his eyes. 42 hours, less than 2 days, but something has shifted. Patton didn't agree to anything, didn't withdraw his ultimatum. But he listened, and that's more than Eisenhower had this morning. Maybe Marshall was right. Sometimes you don't choose between existing options. You create space for new ones to emerge. The question is, will 42 hours be enough? January 10th, 1945. 1400 hours. Versailles, 28 hours remaining. Eisenhower sits in the war room surrounded by maps and reports and the constant hum of military operations. But his mind isn't on the war against Germany. It's on the war within his own command structure. Smith enters carrying a message, flimsy. His expression is carefully neutral, which usually means bad news. Montgomery's headquarters just issued another statement, Smith says, in response to press inquiries about whether he'll issue a clarification. Eisenhower doesn't want to ask, but he has to. And, quote, the Field Marshal has provided an accurate and complete assessment of operations in his sector. He has nothing to add and sees no need for further comment. Unquote. Of course, Montgomery has dug in, decided that any retreat would be seen as weakness. He's going to ride this out, confident that Eisenhower can't touch him. Anything from London? Eisenhower asks. Churchill's speech is supposed to be tomorrow, isn't it? Day after tomorrow, January 12th, but sir... Smith hesitates. There's something else. A transcript from a BBC interview Montgomery gave this morning. It hasn't aired yet, but we got an advance copy through liaison channels. Smith hands over another sheet. Eisenhower reads it, feeling the blood drain from his face. Interviewer. Field Marshal. Some American commanders have expressed concern about your recent characterization of operations in the Ardennes. What would you say to them? Montgomery, I would say that I have the utmost respect for American courage and fighting spirit, but respect doesn't require me to misrepresent facts. The situation was grave when I assumed command of the northern sector. My job was to stabilize it. I did so. If American commanders are uncomfortable with that truth, perhaps they should examine why their forces were in such difficulty in the first place. Eisenhower sets down the transcript. His hands are shaking, not with fear, with rage. When does this air? Tomorrow morning, BBC Home Service, 0900 hours London time. 24 hours before Churchill's speech, Montgomery is doubling down, making it impossible for Churchill to provide a graceful way out without directly contradicting his field marshal on air. It's a calculated move. Brilliant, even. Montgomery knows Churchill won't publicly humiliate him, which means Churchill's speech will have to be carefully worded, diplomatic. Nothing that will satisfy Patton or the American press. Montgomery has outmaneuvered them all. Get me Churchill again, Eisenhower says. I don't care what time it is in London. Get him on the phone. Sir, it's already after midnight there. His staff won't... I don't care if I have to wake him myself. Get him on the phone. Smith leaves. Eisenhower stands, walks to the window. Outside, snow is falling. Soft, gentle, beautiful. The kind of snow that makes you forget there's a war on, except there is a war. Multiple wars. The war against Germany, the war against Montgomery's ego, the war against time. 28 hours until Patton's deadline. And now this. The phone call to London takes an hour to arrange. Churchill's personal secretary refuses at first, citing the late hour. Smith has to invoke Eisenhower's authority as supreme commander, mention the word crisis 3 times. Finally, the connection goes through. Churchill's voice is thick with sleep and irritation. General Eisenhower, this had better be worth waking me at 1:30 in the morning. Prime Minister, I apologize, but Montgomery just gave an interview to the BBC. It airs tomorrow morning, before your speech. And he's doubled down on everything, made it worse. Said American commanders should examine why their forces were in such difficulty. Silence on the line. Then Churchill's voice, suddenly sharp. All traces of sleep gone. What? I'm sending you the transcript now, but Prime Minister, this changes everything. If that interview airs before your speech, there's no way to walk this back. The narrative becomes fixed. British Field Marshal says Americans were incompetent. No amount of diplomatic language in your speech will undo that. More silence. Eisenhower can hear Churchill breathing, can imagine him reading the transcript that's being delivered to him even as they speak. That bloody fool, Churchill finally says, not Montgomery, just that bloody fool. But the venom in his voice leaves no doubt who he means. Can you stop the interview from airing? Eisenhower asks. The BBC is independent. I can't censor them. But... Churchill pauses. I can have a word with the Director General, suggests that airing this interview would not serve the national interest. But Eisenhower, you need to understand something. If I quash this interview, Montgomery will know, and he'll know I did it at your request. That will create its own set of problems. What kind of problems? The kind where a British Field Marshal feels his own Prime Minister doesn't support him, where British commanders start wondering if their accomplishments will always be subordinated to American political concerns. You're asking me to choose between Montgomery and the alliance. I'll do it, but the price is higher than you think. Eisenhower closes his eyes. I know what I'm asking, sir, and I know what it costs, but the alternative is losing Patton and Bradley. 28 hours from now, they both resign, and the American command structure collapses. 28 hours. Churchill's voice is thoughtful now. That's your deadline, is it? Yes, sir. Then here's what I'll do. I'll stop the interview, and I'll move my speech up. Tomorrow afternoon, not the day after, I'll address Parliament at 1400 hours. That gives you... Churchill pauses, calculating. 36 hours. Can you hold Patton that long? I don't know, but I'll try. Try harder than that, General, because if you can't, We're all going to look like bloody fools. Understood. Understood. The line goes dead. Eisenhower sets down the phone. Smith is waiting. Churchill's moving his speech up, Eisenhower says. Tomorrow afternoon, and he's killing Montgomery's interview. That's good news, isn't it? It should be. But now I need to keep Patton from resigning for another 36 hours, and I need to do it without telling him that Churchill is muzzling Montgomery. Because if Patton finds out, he'll see it as confirmation that Montgomery is untouchable, that the only way to win is to resign in protest. Smith nods slowly. So what do we tell him? Nothing, not yet. First, I need to make sure Churchill's speech actually says what needs to be said. You're going to write Churchill's speech? No, but I'm going to suggest very strongly what it should contain. Eisenhower sits down at his desk, pulls out a yellow legal pad, starts writing. Points that must be included: 1. Acknowledge American sacrifices at Bastogne. 2. Credit Patton's Third Army with breaking the siege. 3. Emphasize Allied cooperation, not British leadership. 4. Put Montgomery's contribution in context of larger Operation. 5. No direct criticism of any commander, he writes for an hour. Revising, refining, every word has to be perfect. Too weak, and it won't satisfy the Americans. Too strong, and it humiliates Montgomery, making the situation worse. Finally, he has it. 3 paragraphs, 150 words. Everything Churchill needs to say, and nothing he doesn't. Send this to London, Eisenhower tells Smith. Marked for Churchill's eyes only, not a suggestion, a request from one Allied leader to another. Smith takes the pad, reads it. This is good, really good, but will Churchill use it? I don't know, but I've given him the tool. Whether he uses it is up to him. January 11th, 1945, 1400 hours, London. Churchill rises in the House of Commons. The chamber is packed. Word has spread that the Prime Minister will address the situation in the Ardennes. Everyone knows there's friction between Montgomery and the Americans. Everyone wants to hear how Churchill will handle it. In Versailles, Eisenhower sits in his office listening to the speech over a radio connection. Smith is with him. They've cleared the room of everyone else. 10 hours until Patton's deadline. Churchill's voice comes through the speaker, strong despite the static. Mr. Speaker, I wish to address the House regarding recent operations on the Western Front, specifically the great battle in the Ardennes, which some have termed the Battle of the Bulge. Churchill pauses. The pause carries across the ocean through the radio waves into Eisenhower's office. This battle represents one of the finest examples of Allied cooperation in the entire war. When the German offensive struck on December 16th, American forces bore the brunt of the attack. They held. Against overwhelming odds, in the most appalling weather conditions imaginable, they held. Eisenhower leans forward. This is good. This is what he asked for. Churchill continues. At Bastogne, the 101st Airborne Division, entirely American, withstood a siege by 5 German divisions. 7 days, no resupply, no evacuation of wounded. They held because they are brave men, superbly led. Better. General Patton's Third Army achieved something remarkable. They pivoted 90 degrees in the middle of winter and drove north through a blizzard to relieve Bastogne. This maneuver will be studied in military academies for generations. It was aggressive, it was audacious, and it worked. Eisenhower feels something loosen in his chest. Churchill is doing it. He's actually doing it. Field Marshal Montgomery commanded the northern shoulder of the battle with his characteristic skill and professionalism. His contribution to stabilizing the situation was significant. But, and I want to be very clear about this, the Battle of the Bulge was won by Allied forces working together, American and British, not one or the other. There it is. The key line, the one that puts Montgomery in his place, without humiliating him. Churchill's voice rises now, taking on that familiar cadence that has rallied Britain through the darkest days of the war. I have seen some press reports suggesting that British forces saved American forces from disaster. This is nonsense. Utter nonsense. The Americans saved themselves. They held the line when it seemed it could not be held. They counterattacked when the enemy expected them to retreat. They won this battle through courage, determination, and the blood of 76,000 casualties. The chamber erupts in applause. Even through the radio, Eisenhower can hear it. Members of Parliament on their feet, cheering. When the noise subsides, Churchill continues, his voice softer now, more reflective. Gentlemen, we are winning this war, but we are winning it together. American industrial might and British experience. American boldness and British steadiness, we need both. And any attempt to divide credit to claim one nation's contribution as superior to another's serves only our enemies. Another pause. Then Churchill delivers the final blow. I have the highest respect for Field Marshal Montgomery. He is one of Britain's finest commanders, but the victory in the Ardennes belongs to no single commander. It belongs to every soldier who stood in the snow, every officer who made impossible decisions, every nation that contributed to this great alliance. Churchill sits down. The applause is thunderous. Eisenhower leans back in his chair, closes his eyes. He did it, Smith says quietly. Churchill actually did it. Yes, he did. Now the question is, will it be enough? Eisenhower doesn't have to wait long for an answer. 30 minutes after Churchill's speech ends, the phone rings. Smith answers, listens, hands it to Eisenhower. It's Patton. Eisenhower takes the receiver, braces himself. George, I heard Churchill's speech. Patton's voice is different, not angry, not cold, something else. And I'm withdrawing my ultimatum. Eisenhower feels the tension drain from his body. You're sure? I'm sure. Churchill said what needed to be said. He gave credit where credit was due. He put Montgomery in his place without making it a circus. That's all I wanted, Ike. For someone in authority to acknowledge what my men did, what they sacrificed. I know, George. Did you have anything to do with that speech? With what Churchill said, Eisenhower considers lying, decides against it. I may have made some suggestions. Patton laughs. It's a genuine laugh, not bitter or sarcastic. You magnificent bastard. You actually pulled it off. We pulled it off, all of us, together. Yeah, together. Patton pauses. Bradley's withdrawing his resignation too. I talked to him before I called you. We're good. The alliance holds. Thank you, George. Don't thank me. Just remember this when the next crisis comes. Because there will be a next crisis. There always is. The line goes dead. Eisenhower sets down the phone, looks at Smith. It's over, Smith says. The crisis is over. This crisis is over. Patton's right. There will be others. But for now, for this moment, the alliance holds. 6 days later, January 16th, 1945, elements of Patton's Third Army link up with First Army at Hauffeleise. The German pocket is cut in half. The Battle of the Bulge is officially over. Eisenhower stands in the war room watching as staff officers update the maps. Blue arrows converging, red arrows fragmenting, the visual representation of victory. But he's not thinking about the Germans. He's thinking about what almost happened. How close they came to losing everything, not to enemy action, but to pride and resentment, and the inability of great men to work together. Smith enters carrying a folder. Final casualty figures from the Bulge, Smith says. You wanted them as soon as they were compiled. Eisenhower opens the folder, reads, American casualties 89,500, killed, wounded, missing. British casualties 1,400, German casualties 100,000. The numbers tell a story, a brutal story. The Americans bore the overwhelming weight of the battle. Patton was right to be angry about Montgomery's press conference. Bradley was right to threaten resignation. But they stayed, they fought, they won. There's something else, Smith says. He hands over a letter. Personal stationery. British. Eisenhower reads it. Dear General Eisenhower, I write to express my gratitude for your leadership during recent events. The speech I delivered in Parliament was necessary, but it was also painful. You put me in a position where I had to choose between supporting my Field Marshal and preserving the alliance. I chose the alliance. I would do so again. But understand that this choice has consequences. Montgomery knows what I did. He knows I essentially repudiated his assessment publicly. Our relationship, never warm, is now decidedly cold. He will continue to serve with distinction, I have no doubt, but he will not forget. Neither will I. You asked me to help you create a third option, a way to keep both Patton and Montgomery. We succeeded. But the price was paid in political capital I can ill afford to spend. I trust this was worth it. Yours, Winston S. Churchill. Eisenhower folds the letter carefully, puts it in his desk drawer. Was it worth it? Smith asks. The cost Churchill paid, Eisenhower thinks about Hauffeleise, about the link-up, about American and British forces meeting in the ruins of a Belgian town, shaking hands, celebrating together. He thinks about what would have happened if Patton had resigned, if Bradley had followed, if the command structure had collapsed 8 days before that moment. Yes, Eisenhower says, it was worth it. March 22nd, 1945, the Rhine River. Patton's Third Army crosses the Rhine at Oppenheim, 24 hours before Montgomery's carefully planned crossing at Wesel. Patton calls Eisenhower personally to report the success. We're across, Patton says. His voice is jubilant. No air support, no artillery preparation, just balls and initiative. Tell Montgomery I'm already in Germany while he's still bringing up his supply trains. Eisenhower should reprimand him, should tell him to keep the rivalry out of official communications, but he doesn't. Congratulations, George, well done, because sometimes you need men like Patton, men who refuse to wait for permission, who take risks others won't, who win through audacity. The next day, Montgomery crosses the Rhine with overwhelming force, textbook execution, minimal casualties, systematic destruction of German defenses, because sometimes you need men like Montgomery too, men who plan meticulously, who minimize risk, who win through preparation. The war needs both, the alliance needs both, and Eisenhower, caught between them, needs to make both work together long enough to finish the job. May 8th, 1945. Germany surrenders. Eisenhower sits in his office at SHAEF headquarters reading the surrender documents. After 6 years of war, it's over. Europe is free, the alliance held. Smith enters carrying a bottle of champagne and 2 glasses. Victory, Smith says simply. Victory, Eisenhower agrees. They pour, they drink. They don't celebrate loudly or dramatically. They're too tired for that. Do you think it would have ended differently? Smith asks. If Patton had resigned back in January, if the alliance had fractured, Eisenhower considers the question. We'll never know. But I think, yes, I think it would have taken longer, more casualties, more destruction. The Germans would have exploited the division, held out longer. So Churchill's speech saved lives, thousands of them, maybe tens of thousands, by keeping the alliance together, by allowing us to finish this war before summer instead of dragging it into winter.
Duh. Smith nods, pours more champagne. What about Montgomery? Smith asks. Think you'll ever work with him again? I hope not, but probably yes. If there's another war, another alliance, we'll need him, just like we needed him for this one. And Patton, Eisenhower doesn't answer immediately. Patton is already causing problems in occupied Germany, making inappropriate statements, antagonizing the Russians, being Patton.
But Patton also drove farther and faster than any other American commander, took more ground, killed more Germans, won more battles. We'll always need men like Patton, Eisenhower finally says, until we don't. They sit in silence drinking champagne, thinking about the war that's over and the peace that's beginning. The lesson Eisenhower learned in January 1945 wasn't about tactics or strategy. It was about leadership. Sometimes leadership isn't about making the right decision. It's about making the necessary decision, the one that keeps everything from falling apart long enough to accomplish the mission. Fire Montgomery and lose Churchill's support. Keep Montgomery and lose Patton. Either choice leads to disaster. So Eisenhower created a third option, not by being clever, not by finding a loophole, but by forcing everyone involved to look beyond their own grievances and see the larger picture. He made Patton understand that honor without victory is meaningless. He made Churchill understand that alliance unity mattered more than protecting Montgomery's pride. He made Montgomery never really understood, but that was okay. He didn't need to understand. He just needed to be marginalized enough that his arrogance couldn't destroy the alliance. The cost was high. Churchill's political capital, Eisenhower's personal stress, the near collapse of command authority. But the alternative would have been higher. 60 hours. That's how long Eisenhower had to save the alliance. 60 hours to prevent 2 of his best commanders from resigning in protest. 60 hours to keep the war from dragging on months longer than necessary. He did it by refusing to accept the binary choice, by understanding that leadership sometimes means forcing people to be better than they want to be. Years later, someone asked Eisenhower what the hardest decision of the war was. D-Day, they expected him to say, or the decision to race for Berlin, or any of 100 tactical choices that cost thousands of lives. But Eisenhower said, January 1945, keeping Montgomery and Patton from destroying each other, that was harder than anything the Germans threw at us. Because war isn't just about defeating the enemy, it's about keeping your own side from falling apart under the pressure. And sometimes that's the hardest battle of all.